Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Studio Salon Conversations in the Commons, Self Fashion. My name is Dayon Huff, and I'm Director of Public Programs and Community Engagement at the Studio Museum in Harlem. On behalf of the museum, we'd like to thank you so much for tuning in as the world continues to open up again, and on a weekend nonetheless, which have become more and more precious. Our Studio Salon series offers an opportunity to explore the dynamic intersections between literature and contemporary art. And today's program, inspired by our current exhibition, Thomas J. Price Witness, a monumental sculpture of the everyday and the ordinary installed in Harlem's Marcus Garvey Park through October 1st, 2022, is no exception. This program aims to provide an opportunity to break down some of the big ideas and concepts of Thomas J. Price's The Distance Within into more digestible and relatable bites to a wider public, but to also provide a space for those who are already actively unpacking these ideas to commune with new and existing peers. We are so grateful to the Helen Frankenthaler Foundation's Frankenthaler Digital Initiative, the Open Society Foundations, and Art Bridges for their support to make digital programs like this one possible, as well as Citi and the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for their support of In Harlem public programming. This program is being recorded, so if you'd like to disable your video, please click Stop Video in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. Closed captioning, generously provided by Steno Captions, is available by selecting the CC icon, also located at the bottom of the screen. ASL interpretation is generously provided by Pro Bono ASL. If you have questions, comments, reactions, we encourage you to activate the chat or when prompted by facilitators to unmute yourself. Lastly, we encourage you to watch today's program in speaker view by switching your viewing settings in the top right corner, or if you want to see everyone's beautiful faces, please keep it in gallery mode. I'd now briefly like to introduce today's facilitators. Full bios can be found on the event page and in the chat. Danilo Machado is a poet, curator, and critic living on occupied land, interested in language's potential for revealing tenderness, erasure, and relationships to power. Rikki Byrd is a writer, educator, and curator with research interests in Black studies, performance studies, fashion studies, and art history. And finally, Antoine Gregory is a fashion consultant and editorial stylist based in New York. At the end of the program, we'll put in the chat a brief survey. I hope you can take a moment to complete before signing off. And with that, I pass along to our lead facilitator, Danilo, who will offer you a framework for today. Thank you and enjoy.
Thanks so much for that introduction, and thanks so much everyone for being here. I'm so excited for this program. It's been truly so fun working with everybody at Studio Museum and with my co-facilitators today. And I think it's going to be a really exciting conversation as we begin to unpack this super rich and layered sculpture project exhibition by Thomas J. Price. Like Dayon mentioned, this is a series going on throughout the run of the exhibition, so through next year. And we're really excited to unpack some of the big ideas present in the sculpture and in Price's larger practice, including those of masculinity, surveillance, public space, and monument, and today, fashion and self-fashioning. So this is the first of a series of programs, and I couldn't have asked for a better beginning. I think it's going to be really exciting. So to kick us off, I'm really glad to welcome Rikki, who's going to give us a little bit of an overview of her practice and a reading of one of our texts that we're centering today. So take it away, Rikki.
Thank you, Danilo. I'm going to share my screen, everyone, just a second. So thank you, Dayon, and thank you, Danilo, for the introduction. Thank you to the Studio Museum in Harlem for this invitation to participate in the salon on the occasion of Thomas J. Price's installation Witness. Today, I'm going to give a brief presentation that will ground us in the rest of the workshop and how we might use fashion and styling practices as a lens to think about how we move through our private lives in different publics, and how looking at images from our own archives inform our own self-making through self-presentation. So I want to begin in Harlem on the occasion of this event, of course, being hosted by the Studio Museum, whose rich history has long celebrated and supported Harlem, along with Black artists who have been influenced and in dialogue with the community through their practices. UK fashion scholar Carol Tulloch, writes, quote, "The past imposes itself on Harlem from the exteriors and interiors of its homes, studios, and businesses, the bricks and mortar of its buildings, and the tarmac of its avenues and streets, the performance of style and Harlem aesthetics by its inhabitants," end quote. To illustrate this, Tulloch looks to an image that I want to open with today. On the screen, one that many of us here might know well. Couple, Harlem, taken by the famed Harlem Renaissance photographer James Van Der Zee in 1932, I'm sorry. Two figures, a man and woman, look toward the camera, the woman's gaze staring slightly past it. Their accoutrements is that of luxury for the time, and perhaps still today. They both wear raccoon fur coats. The woman tucks her hands inside the pockets of hers. The man, sitting comfortably inside of the car, clasps his hands and rests them on the fur in his lap. The woman, standing outside of the car, a Cadillac V16 to be precise, wears heels with detailing on the toe and black stockings, and we see her dress just peeking below her coat. Her short curls peek from under her hat. She smiles. The toe of the man's shoe peeks from under the passenger side of the car that's ajar. He wears a light colored hat with a band across it. Removed from Van Der Zee's studio, where he often imaged his black sitters, a Harlem street serves as the backdrop for this image, made up of rows of brownstones and another car sitting in the left-hand corner. Quote, "The way to begin a new wardrobe, start with the coat, for on that hang all the laws of well-planned chic," end quote. American Vogue, 1932. Tulloch uses this quote to illustrate the popularity of fur coats during the time period, a time period in which Black readers were certainly not Vogue's audience, not considered stylish enough to be spoken to or spoken about. Concerns that continue to manifest in and around the fashion industry today. Nevertheless, the Black couple in Van Der Zee's photo still adorned themselves in the styles of the times, reflecting their desires of self-representation, but also access to glamour, luxury, and middle-class sensibilities. Tulloch asks, quote, "What then is the cultural meaning of the raccoon coat worn by this Black couple in Harlem in 1932? I believe this Black couple, styled in raccoon coats, photographed in Harlem, performed a political act of self-expression and self-determination," end quote. I turn now to my own family archive, taking us from Harlem back to the South, Little Rock, Arkansas, where my maternal family made a life before some of them relocated to St. Louis, Missouri, where I was born and raised. In the middle is an image of my great-grandmother, Janie Malpia, also known as Big Mama to the rest of the family. On each side of her image, there are quilts that she created by hand and that I recently inherited as I have now become the steward of my family's archive. On the left, Big Mama has created little doll-like figures made out of scraps from around her home and denim and other textiles. On the right, she's created a blue background for these different tiles and circular discs. And the textiles made up in this quilt are towels that Big Mama had in her house just lying around, as well as other scraps that she found in and around her house. So before I continue with my own family archive, I do want to note that most recently quilts by Black women from the South have risen to art world significance and have also been the inspiration for fashion collections. For example, as you can see here on this slide, British designer Nicholas Daly's Spring Summer 2022 collection was inspired by quilts by women of Gee's Bend. You might see the similarity between this 1970 quilt in the middle by Nellie Mae Abrams and Daly's looks on the left and the right that repeat some of her techniques in this quilt. So returning to Big Mama and her quilts, she made them for her children, she made them for her grandchildren. Up until I was born, she was getting, much older, so her hands could not move like they used to. She passed her love of textiles and sewing to the rest of the women in her lineage, my Nana and my mother. So my Nana, featured in images on the left and right, She is on the left, she's wearing a pink fringe dress that she wore to my mother's wedding, a red and white polka dot dress, a red suit with a black turtleneck with her beer in her hand because she loved to party. And on the right, you can see my Nana in a tan coat with different color brown, a leather coat, I'm sorry, with different color patches of brown, black, and tan. She's photographed there with my mother and my papa. So my Nana would often knit scarves and hats and hem my two big school skirts. My mother organized local fashion shows in St. Louis where she, my dad, my godmother, and several of their friends would model, sometimes wearing designs made by people in the modeling troupe that they had created. My mother fell in love with sewing. And while she inherited it from my great grandmother and my grandmother, my papa on the right could also sew. And so he would sometimes sit with my mother and show her different sewing techniques. So through her love of sewing, my mother acquired what I believe to be a God-given talent of creating her own patterns. She's a person who could literally look at something at a store and go back home to her studio and recreate it almost verbatim. She continues to sew today, providing custom items to residents of my hometown. So a brief sampling of things that she's created in my lifetime. She created my prom dress based off of a very terrible drawing that I gave to her when I was in high school that she brought to life beautifully. She created Sweet 16 ensembles when my friend was obsessed with Beyonce's Diva song. And so she recreated Beyonce looks for my friend for her Sweet 16 birthday. She's created prom dresses. She's participated in local fashion shows. The list literally goes on and on. And so from these women, I grew up with the ethos of making something out of nothing, of not looking like what you've been through. Ethos that were often displayed through their love for textiles, shopping, and getting dressed. This love was what they shrouded me in, teaching me life lessons and helping me to create scaffolding for a personal life and professional life that always honors them. Although I did not take to sewing like my big mama, Nana, and my mother, if you sit me in front of a sewing machine, I adamantly resist. I do not want to do it. I still use my hands constantly through working with my writing, my research, and the haptic practice of moving through archives, institutional and personal. By way of example, and before I pass the baton to Antoine, who is committed to similar work, I want to conclude with an excerpt from my contribution to the 2018 exhibition catalog Amongst Friends, which featured photographs of Harlem residents bringing it back to Harlem, Harlem resident Miss Lena Turner, taken by my good friend Dario Calmes. My mother sought solace in her sewing machine. In her moments of joy and pain, it was always a constant friend indeed. I watched my Nana hem my two long pans and cowered as she took the hot comb from the top of the stove and tried her best not to singe my scalp or my ear. She often yelled, "Hold your ear, Rikki." She has always had an affinity for hats, as if keeping her head covered was a preservation of her most valuable asset, her mind. My godmother, a beauty salon owner, would match her luxury goods from head to toe. Even if they were faux, she exuded authenticity. She was telling you that she had the right to curate her body as one of worthiness. I keep items from each of them. My mother's designs, my Nana's hot comb, my godmother's well-kept vintage items. And oh, how phenomenal it is to be amongst warriors, to be amongst friends. Thank you. Antoine, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Rikki. That was a great segue into like my own work with Black Fashion Fair and just allowing people to and wanting people to reconsider and revalue their own family images and doing it both privately and publicly. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys. I already shared a link in the chat where you can see a bit about my collaboration with the Affilio and our family portrait tees. I'm going to share my screen now. So you guys all see like a big yellow box? Okay, so and last year we created a collaboration with Edvin Thompson of Theophilia, where we wanted to highlight the Black family portrait and really consider our own collections through this collaboration. And it was really exciting because what we did was give people the opportunity to create their own t-shirts using images that they found through their archive, whether it's family or friends. And it was just like a really important idea that we wanted to share with the world. And we were able to do so through this way because the t-shirt is probably one of the most accessible items that people get to like express themselves, whether that's politically or just fashionably. And then from that article, this is a quote from W Magazine that talks about us reclaiming the Black image, not only in just photography, but like in the fashion space. We invited our followers, our customers, our friends to share their own family images. And we were able to do this through social media and get a lot of images that people like just shared openly and freely. And it was important because I noted that very few institutions had collected images of Black people prior to like the 1960s. So when you go to a library or you go to a museum, the images you see of Black families and Black people are not really as diverse as the Black experience is. They're very, very like one note. And through these images, we got to see so many different representations of the Black family, of friendship, of just like of brotherhood. There was just so many different representations of the Black family portrait. Is it frozen? And when we invited people to share their images, we also obviously made them the t-shirts. And it was really cool because as Black Fashion Fair, we advocate for the accessibility and the discoverability of Black designers. And we collaborated on these pieces with a Black designer who was an immigrant. And even his own family image, the family portrait image that he used on his shirt was the last image that he took with his family in Jamaica before they made their way to America. And that was just like such a great moment because not only were we able to, share his story, we were able to create an artifact for him that he can have forever. And I think that was like the key point in creating these t-shirts was to create things that could live on, so that when we do, have our family images and we do reconsider our own archives, that they don't live in just a photo book, but they can live on our bodies. And I think that's important because like with Black people specifically, we were not always allowed into certain spaces. And then now we get to like take not only ourselves, but our families with us. So this was like one of the submissions we got, which is from Dapper Dan and his son, Jelani Day. This photo was taken in 1987. And it's really cool because it's obviously another version of a family portrait that isn't necessarily like an entire family, but it's just a father and son. It's a moment that's captured. And then Dapper Dan himself is a Black fashion icon. And we got to use this image on a t-shirt by another Black designer, but just like being able to have those I don't even know what to call it, but like to have like Dapper Dan do a shirt on another Black designer's t-shirt. So it was like a really cool moment, and they both love the shirt. And it's like watching history create itself. This was another submission that we got from our friend Sola. And this photo is really cool because it was his father on his flight to New York City when he left Nigeria to create a life for him and his children. So this is like a quote here from Sola. I can't read it because the stuff is in a way. But he says this photo was taken in August 1986 on my father's farewell flight from Lagos to New York City. He decided to leave Nigeria for New York in order to go to school for computer science. He had family from his village who was living here already, which landed him in Brooklyn. The traditional attire while traveling is something that has always stood out to me. The agbabada is mostly worn on special occasions, and this most definitely was one. As an African man who is proud of his heritage, I know he wanted to let the clothes say, "Hello, America, this Nigerian has arrived." And like seeing these moments captured on these t-shirts was more than just like, just simply putting images on a t-shirt, but these are stories. This is someone's life. And you get to see this shirt and you get to read this story, or you get to have this experience if you walk like, "Hey, what's on your shirt?" And now you know this story. So I thought that was really cool. And this is another one from Role. This is his brother. They both have like these they have great, some people really do have great family archives, and I think a lot of us do not. And I think with this collaboration, I think people got to see how little images that they kept, and maybe now they're able to take more photos and keep more photos and, build an archive of images now, because most people do not have very large archives of their own family images. And I thought for Rikki to show us some of her images, we had a conversation once about how people did not take care of their archives or did not take photos and how small those archives were. But this is just another great t-shirt that we did. I was super excited about to like give to them and for them to have this special moment. With this collaboration, we also wanted to, in highlighting family portraits, we wanted to highlight the family reunion. And I think if you ever gone to a Black family reunion, you always get a t-shirt. You always have the t-shirt with who your family is, you guys come together, and those are things that you kind of hold on to forever. And I'm gonna share a video with you guys. So when we did this, we wanted to highlight all the families that we created images of. We were able to take these images and make them into oversized blankets. We held a whole event entitled Family Reunion, of course, where people got to like have conversations in an intimate setting, play games, and like really experience like what it would be like at a family reunion. There were performances, and it was just like a very, very beautiful moment. So I want to share this video. So with that, we really wanted to celebrate the Black family. And as you can see, it was like a very joyful event, and you see kids playing, and it just felt like you were with your friends and your family. And I think it's kind of what like this whole idea, this whole project is about, like even this conversation with like sharing your private and personal selves. And I think Black people do that so beautifully with each other. And then, like I mentioned earlier, like a lot of institutions did not consider or keep images of Black people. And so what we wanted to do is give our friends and our families and people who came to our event the opportunity to take their own family portraits. And if you're Black, you know that your mom's friend's kid is your cousin, like everybody's family. So what we did here is have photographer Christian Cody take family portraits. And we made all these images available for people to download and just to have and to share. And I think when we are, advocating for ourselves, that we must also we must also like keep these things alive. So by taking images, by keeping images, by sharing our images, by sharing our stories, and us being the ones to own those narratives. What is next? And this was just like one of my favorite images from the photo set. It's this mother and son. Like I said, like the family portrait could be so many different things. And here, it's not 5 people, it's not 7 people, just 2 people who are looking at each other adoringly. And they get to have this photo, they get to keep this photo, hopefully forever. And that is it.
Thank you so much, Antoine and Rikki, for sharing all that rich family history, that generous consideration of the archive, and that really tender reading of these fashion objects, the fur coat, the quilt, the t-shirt, and these are all ideas, you know, I'm excited to talk about in the rest of the session. Including with this writing exercise. If folks join us before our introductions, welcome. We're glad you're here. And there are closed captioning available. If you need it, it's in the bottom of your screen. There should be a CC button. And if you have questions for Antoine and Rikki or myself, you can put them in the chat, and if we don't get to it in the conversation, we'll get to it at the end of the program. So next, if we can have the PowerPoint back up. So I wear a lot of hats, but often I'm like, I describe myself as a poet first. So I knew that we had to have some poetry as part of this salon. And through Rikki's brilliant suggestion of this poem by Essex Hemphill, who's a poet I really admire and love, Black queer activist poet, important to the Washington, D.C. Scene in the 70s and 80s, passed away in the late 90s, 1995, I believe. And always sort of a grounding force. And this is, I think, one of the lesser known poems by Hemphill that just fits so perfectly with all of these ideas of how fashion objects can be symbols, can be descriptors, can be touch points, can be memorials in a lot of ways. So I'm going to read this poem, and then I'm going to ask somebody from the audience to read it again. And then we're going to do some writing, some reflecting together, and we'll go from there. So this is called Homicide for Ronald Gibson by Essex Hemphill. Grief is not apparel, not like a dress, a wig, or my sister's high-heeled shoes. It is darker than the man I love, who in my fantasies comes for me in a silver 6-cylinder chariot. I walk the waterfront curbsides in my sister's high-heeled shoes, dreaming of him, his name still unknown to my tongue. While I wait for my prince to come, from every other man I demand pay for my kisses. I buy paint for my lips, stockings for my legs, my own high-heeled slippers and dresses that come for me. When he comes, I know I must be beautiful. I know I will know how to love his body. Standing out here on the waterfront curbsides, I have learned to please a man. He will bring me flowers. He will bring me silk and jewels, I know. While I wait, I'm the only man who loves me. They call me star because I listen to dreams and wishes, but grief is darker. It is a white dress that covers my body. It is a wig that does not rest gently on my head. If somebody from the audience would be up for reading this, you can unmute and we can spotlight you for a minute, if you will indulge. I see a raised hand somewhere. If somebody, oh, there it is.
I can read.
Perfect. Let me, I think, let me pin you. Okay, great. I think you're pinned. You can go ahead. Thank you.
All right. Grief is not apparel, not like a dress, a wig, or my sister's high-heeled shoes. It is darker than the man I love, who in my fantasies comes for me in a silver six-cylinder chariot. I walk the waterfront curbsides in my sister's high-heeled shoes, dreaming of him, his name still unknown to my tongue, while I wait for my prince to come. From every other man I demand pay for my kisses. I buy paint for my lips, stockings for my legs, my own high-heeled slippers and dresses that become me. When he comes, I know I must be beautiful. I will know how to love his body. Standing out here on the waterfront curbsides, I have learned to please a man. He will bring me flowers. He will bring me silk and jewels, I know. While I wait, I am the only man who loves me. They call me star because I listen to dreams and wishes. But grief is darker. It is a white dress that covers my body. It is a wig that does not rest gently on my head.
Thank you so much for that reading. And before we go on to the prompt, I'll read a little excerpt from the Washington Blade article that references the Ronald Gibson, the person the poem is dedicated to. And it's included in the link in the chat where you can find this poem also. So an article from 1982 in the Washington Blade, it reads, Ronald Gibson, 20, was found shot to death in the 2700 block of Arizona Avenue Northwest. Police said Gibson was wearing a dress and high-heeled shoes at the time of his death. According to the homicide department, homicide detective Lloyd Davis, Gibson, also known as Star, hung out during the past 2 years in the area near 14th and Fairmont Streets Northwest, an area frequented by drag queens who solicit sex for money. Detectives say they have no suspects and know of no motives in the case. So, you can keep the PowerPoint up actually, sort of reflecting on the poem and on the images that we saw with Rikki and Antoine, both the archival images by James Van Der Zee and the contemporary images, the family reunion T-shirts, and if some of you brought your own family images, we're going to do some writing. So here is your prompt. So inspired by tactics of describing self-fashioning used by Hemphill and Tulloch, and drawing from images by Van Der Zee or your own family archive, write a poem or reflection where one or more fashion objects is used to create a portrait. And we can show the next 2 slides, which are just some example family images provided by folks at Studio Museum. I don't know if folks, Rikki or Antoine, have anything to add And we can also I'll also post the prompts in the chat if that's easier to. I think we have 2 images, right? Both very fabulous. Yes. Okay, great. So with that, maybe we can leave it on the prompt and we can get some music. Feel free to be inspired by any of the very fashionable objects and people that we've been joined by and looking at during this salon, and write and reflect. So we'll take about 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll call everyone back, and then we'll take a little break. During that break, you can continue writing if you'd like, but obviously no pressure. And then afterwards, we will come back and have a few folks share either what they wrote or what that experience was like for them in considering this, this prompt. Welcome back, everybody, and thank you, Ilk and Leon. I know you said, like, you know, this playlist had some bops, but I don't think I was ready. Really, yeah, the music has been incredible. And I hope everyone enjoyed the writing and the break, you know, got some water, I got a snack maybe. So now we're going to take a few minutes just to share about how that process was, or if you'd like to share a little piece of your writing that you wrote, we're happy to hear that as well. So if anybody wants to, I think you can just raise your hand and we'll somebody will unmute you, or you can unmute yourself and we can pin you onto the to the Zoom. Also, feel free to use the chat. So Jihan said, great exercise. Okay.
Thank you so much for this talk, and it was really pleasant. The exercise was very, very interesting. So I'd like to read out the poem that I wrote based on the picture of one of my family members. The silk garment felt the touch of my fingers as I touched myself. The bulb crackled and burned. Hair tied back in a low bun. The net on the sleeves covered my arms. The lens couldn't capture my soul as I gazed to the left. It was the early 1900s, the picture black and white. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. I love all the sensory details and the way you're thinking about the role of the camera too in that poem. Thank you so much. Anybody else want to share about the experience or the piece you wrote?
Julian has their hand up.
Go ahead. Hold on. I think I can. Yeah, go ahead.
You guys hear me? You can? Okay. So actually yesterday I had the idea of creating a book for my family that kind of documents like the style that both the men in my family and the women have had. And so this was a very on time kind of exercise. And so I pulled 2 pictures from my great grandmother's funeral. And afterwards, you know, kind of like in Black families after the funeral, you kind of have like what we call a repast. And so you kind of come together, eat, do stuff like that. And I pulled this picture of my grandmother who's in this kind of like piggy pink 2-piece like linen set with bronze accessories. And that just kind of resonated with me, I guess, because I really like monochromatic fits and I also love jewelry. And that's also something that like stylistically is like a major theme in like Black style, Black American style at least. And then also I have this picture, I don't know who in my family this is, but the men in my family really like to wear gold jewelry. And I also kind of have like a proclivity towards gold jewelry. So those two images kind of resonated with me because I'm like, I really like monochromatic outfits and I love gold jewelry. So I think kind of viewing those family images kind of helped to explain like the fashion that I kind of lean towards. So that was major for me.
Thank you so much for sharing, Julie, and particularly for bringing those images. Yeah, thank you.
I think to Jillian's point, those images are like super, super important, even to how he dresses, like how it influences his own style. And I think that's why I think that's why we need to like continue to like consider like these things because like they have like this lineage that like that lives beyond the photo. So I think that was just like a really cool point, and just like how we've been using like even the t-shirt to like highlight accomplishments, but also like to memorialize people. So yeah, great photos.
Yeah, and how much exists even if sort of some of the details of the archive are blurry, like they still you can still see the threads. You know, maybe pun intended, still see the threads going back. Thank you. And then we'll have Mackenzie. You can go ahead and share.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to share a little bit about this photo here. Okay, can you all see it? Oh, sorry. Wait, let me.
Spotlight. Okay.
Sorry. Okay, I'll figure it out in a second. But so it was a photo of my grandmother. She came from Jamaica to England, and it's a photo of her like with her nursing colleague. She went to study nursing, but I thought a lot about what the earlier conversation was about fashion being like that idea of self-expression and just what I thought was going on in the times. And I had always been drawn to this photo of my grandmother, but I never really understood quite why. And just looking at all the little intricacies of it, her pearl necklace, she's wearing this like dashiki mini dress, some fishnet stockings and some high-heeled shoes, and just thinking about like what that probably meant for her at the time. Like growing up, she was one of the oldest in her household, and then later on, like pretty soon after that, we stepped into that role of like mother of four and wife. And I think that England, like obviously she was going there for nursing and like to build a better future for everyone involved, but I think it also was very much about her and herself and trying to find herself, because I don't think she had an experience to do that. So like these images of her like just having fun with her friends, like in her little mini dress and high heel boots and stuff. And like that freedom and that expression that she had was just really like inspiring to me. And I don't think before, just hearing all the conversations we had before, I don't think I ever thought about it in that context. So yeah, that was like a really unique moment for me. So thank you for the talk.
Thank you so much for sharing that and sharing those new and like growing connections. Rikki, Antoine, any final thoughts about this sort of the prompt and the different images and texts we've been looking at this first bit of the salon?
Well, yeah, I didn't write anything, but I just created this really quickly.
Oh, I love that.
It's just like such a cool way to allow your images, your archive to like live like outside of your home, but to like physically like just
amazing.
And I think what's so cool about this is just like this is like a Black image, you know, like you just see it, you feel it. And even like the jacket, I don't know if you've seen like Aliette's fall winter 22 collection.
Not yet, no.
One collection. There's a jacket that's all black with different shades of black that has the same like scallop cut out.
No.
But yes, that's what I did for my
Thank you so much, Ansel. I need this now. Thank you so much. That's beautiful. Oh, my mom would cry. She would cry.
I think that's like the thing with like a lot of these shirts, like people like having real emotional reactions to them. And they also like look great in real life. I kind of like have this one on.
Love it.
But yeah, but I think this has been really great. And I love that you guys like are sharing like your family images. Like I said, like institutions did not collect them. And if they did, they were like stereotypical representations of Blackness. And like, we are so much more than that. We are like so diverse, but even in that diversity, we share so many of the same experiences.
Absolutely. Which I think is what Mackenzie connected for us, right? In speaking about, you know, your grandmother moving from Jamaica to England for different opportunities, right? But then wearing like the dashiki dress with the fishnet tights. And we know, right, that like specifically in Harlem, right, there were a lot of folks wearing similar outfits probably at a similar time. And so I think using fashion and style as this lens to read images, to think about history, to kind of poke at the holes of archives and poke at the holes of history that has long left Black folks out of it, right, allows us to make even connections globally to other Black experiences and to other folks across the diaspora. So this has been like incredibly generative, and I'm really really reflecting on Mackenzie sharing, because I do think that it stretches us beyond Harlem, beyond the US.
Yeah, I mean, I specifically thought about just like Sola's dad leaving Nigeria, or like Evan's family leaving Jamaica. Like we all share those stories. Like my mother's from Haiti, so like, and now we like live in America. So like that's like just like that's just something we all share, no matter where we came from.
Yeah, so many connections and so many really important fashion objects that become this like emotional link to the past and to the present in new ways and in old ways. So we looked at, you know, the Bandersy coats, the dresses that that your grandmother made, you know, some of the photos that folks shared, the family reunion t-shirts. And now we're gonna focus on another fashion object, the hoodie. So if we can get the PowerPoint up. So for our next activity, we're gonna go into breakout groups. It's 3 breakout groups. And in these groups, we're gonna have a conversation with each other about these 3 works, which feature a hoodie. And if we want to start, Rikki, if you want to start with the first one.
Yep, so we have Devin Shimayama's February artwork, February. It's a sculptural piece from 2018. You want me to keep going?
Sure. So you'll be leading that that breakout group, and then Antoine, we can go to the slide 17. We can want to share a little bit about this work that you'll be leading a conversation on?
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about David Hammond's In the Hood, and just like what this looks like, what this means to you. So yeah.
We're saving the good stuff for the groups.
No, yeah. Yes.
We don't want to give too much away.
And then lastly, I'll be leading the group on the Thomas J. Price sculpture that is currently on view at Marcus Garvey Park in Harlem, Witness. You see that in the center. And as you know, the occasion, one of the occasions for this gathering, for this series. So what is going to happen is we're going to have you all choose the breakout groups that you want to be a part of. So you see these 3 options, and then all the breakout groups are really just going to be conversations, and we're going to be centering around this question: what personal memories does this object prompt you to think about? And then we're going to share back in about 15-20 minutes about some of the highlights from the conversations in the breakout group. If anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat. Otherwise, I think we're ready to start these breakout groups.
Yep.
Welcome back, everybody. I sent a message to everybody just in the last few minutes to start thinking about one person who can report from your group. And again, like, you're you don't have to share everything, just some highlights of your conversation for all of us to hear a little bit of what went on in the breakout groups. But yeah, those breakout groups, the end times are ruthless. They're like, they'll cut you off. Great, yeah, so I hope you had some, at least, some beginnings of conversations with these three really rich works. And so maybe let's start with the group discussing Devin Shimiyama's piece that Rikki led. So maybe somebody from that group want to share a little bit about what y'all talked about.
Yes, so in our group, few thoughts that were shared one was about the relationship between hoodie and warmth, and also this aspect of hoodie and the relationship of hood, and protecting your perception of the hood. Hoodie being the symbol of protecting the perception of the hood. And there was another thought that was shared about hoodie being a cloak to cover queerness. And another thought was about the attractiveness of the object, and how before anyone had read something about this, that the meaning or the perception completely shifted when the text was read underneath the image. And then there were a discussion about the kinds of flowers or the significance of the flowers that were chosen in the hoodie, and the image of the tiger in the middle, and the relationship between the flowers and the tiger.
Thank you so much, Vitali. Does anyone else from the group want to share? I can't see like raised hands and stuff. Nope. Antoine, should we pass it to you and your group?
Yes, that'll be fine. So I guess I can, Gian, I think we had a really good back and forth. If you want to talk a bit about what happened in our group.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, collectively, we were just all expanding on the feeling of both just what the hood represents for, all of us, and how we experience the actual garment of a hoodie or the hood. Just thinking about that for some people it made you think of lynching, because it's situated up on high in the gallery. And then also expanding on we talked about the definitions of what a hoodie could mean in different spaces to different people. We talked about one's definition isn't necessarily the embodiment of how a Black person or a person of color might wear a hoodie. We talked about the differences in how it's perceived in different spaces. Leon mentioned something really interesting. That it happens a lot that, students on campus wear hoodies and sweats, but yet in many cases we've seen in the news where people of color, Black students are getting stopped on campus hey, do you belong here? It's just what's going on? So just interpreting the spaces that a hoodie what it communicates in different spaces.
And I think that was the the best part of the conversation is like how we can communicate things that are like not true, but also how can we take the hoodie and just like reclaim it for ourselves. And I think that's where I think we need to be now as a community, is where like even myself, like I said, I told him how I just wore a hoodie to this talk that I did with Joshua Renfro, and wearing it was like a choice that I made because I knew it was not, it didn't belong in the space, but still taking that object, taking that garment and just like wearing it on my body as protest, as something that I own, that I can reclaim, and that you can see me as however you want to see me, but this is how I'm wearing it and this is who I am, you know?
Yeah, thank you both for sharing. So finally, my group was talking about the Thomas J. Price sculpture in Witness at Marcus Garvey. Does anybody from our group want to share just some of the highlights of what we talked about with this work?
I guess I can share. So we talked about like the intention and this of it, and I think we talked about like context and just like the initial impressions that we all received from it, which were, one, the statue is like 9 feet tall. It's in Harlem, it's in Marcus Garvey Park, and it was kind of the intention. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe, I forget the guy's name, but it starts with a D. From what I remember, is Dennis. I'm sorry. Daniel. I'm sorry. Thank you. But Daniel informed us that the intent was kind of to investigate presence in like these social spaces and these busy environments, and that it was made by a British citizen, which I think is kind of like important, just because of context in terms of, even though racism is like global, but it was just like in a different context how this is here in America, in Harlem. Just like the location, I think, adds a lot of context. The size of the statue being 9 feet tall, I think, is very important for the context, the color, and the impression that I got from it was just about like witnessing and seeing things, just like how it's standing there and not, it's witnessing its environment in terms of what's happening around it. And I'm sorry, I'm getting like, my mind's going blank. If someone else wants to jump in and help, because I feel like I'm leaving things out too.
We talked a little bit about the normalcy of the statue. We talked about how it was, the artist's intention was to make it more welcoming, so there are no like usual art world trappings, like I mean, obviously there's no velvet rope or anything, but he wanted to make it more welcoming, something that you just stumbled upon and were drawn into the normalcy of it. Did we touch on anything else? I don't really remember.
No, I think that's great. Thank you both for sharing a little bit about what we talked about in our breakout group around this sculpture. And definitely, you know, these themes are gonna come back up in this series, in this Salon series, and I'm so excited to continue like delving ever deeper into this work and all the networks of connectedness and questions that it raises. Before we end, I know City Museum has, so that if you need to go at 2 Eastern, you can. So I know there's a survey. So if someone wants to talk about the survey, and then after that, you know, announcement, we can stay on a little bit and answer some of the questions from the session that folks had for Antoine and Rikki particularly.
Thanks, Danilo. It's just it's a very like 2-minute survey from us just to get a sense of your experiences with the program, highlights, suggestions for areas of improvement. So if you have time to fill it out now, that'd be great. But there's also going to be like just an email that'll be sent to you after this program wraps as well.
May I say one thing?
Yes, please.
When they send the links, sometimes they go to spam. So you should tell people to check that. Because I was looking and I said, maybe it's in spam.
Thank you for
that's
that.
where it was. Thank you.
Thank you.
Check your promotions tab, your social tab. Email, you know, there's all sorts of funny things with messages. So yeah, if you need to head out right at 2 p.m. Eastern, you can do so. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure spending time with you all and with all these texts and images that are so rich and so generous. But we'll stay on a few minutes and answer some of the questions from the session. Let me just pull this up.
So I can, I have two of them. So one was to Antoine. Andre Leon Talley speaks about his grandmother's influence. His grandmother's influence on his perspective of fashion and reminisces about the church trips. What are your thoughts on his approach to fashion? Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
I kind of already wrote it out, but what I said was that I think Andre had a very beautiful way of thinking about fashion in a way that put the woman in his life first. And also like his experience in church where it was like getting dressed up, being beautiful, like taking care of yourself, like having these days of just like remembrance. And I think the way he thinks about fashion was where he thought everything was important, everything was beautiful. And I think he loved it so much where like he also like looked past like an industry that like really didn't value him, and ultimately like left him like out in the cold. But I think he just had a really beautiful way of thinking about fashion that really put women first, but especially like the women in his life. Like his grandmother, who he talks about in like both his books, like the books might as well have been about them. But yeah, that's my answer.
And I'll just add to that, Antoine, too, like how many Black designers are, you know, they often credit, you know, their grandmothers or mothers with their pathway and entrance into the fashion industry, right? Like I'm thinking of Patrick Kelly, who talks about how his, I believe it was his grandmother, right, who worked as a maid and would bring back buttons, and how the buttons then became incorporated into a lot of his designs, and Willie Smith's sister being one of his main models, right? When he started his his fashion company, and present day fashion designers like Charles Harbison, who recently published an article in the Atlantic about how his mother, who worked in factories in his hometown of North Carolina, and he would watch her go from her working class uniform to dressing up to go to the mall on the weekends and go to church and so on and so forth, and how that has been infused into so many of his collections. And so I think this is something that we see across the board when we're thinking about Black fashion in particular.
Well, I think for most people, like even myself, my first introduction into like fashion and what things that could be beautiful was like my grandmother, who was a furrier. She worked for a furrier in the Garvey district, and she would come home with like furs, and then like on the weekends we would go thrifting. And that was like my first introduction to like what I thought like style was. And like obviously I didn't like know what it was. I was like, oh, this is cool, this is interesting. And it was like through my grandmother. And the same thing with Andre Leon, like he talks about how his grandmother and like showed him all these different things that were beautiful, and like how he worked so hard to make sure that she was able to have beautiful things in life, almost to his detriment. And I think like Kirby's Pierre Moss is his mother's maiden name, her maiden last name, well, yeah, maiden name. Jason Rimmer's Aliette is named after his grandmother. So like people, it's really the women and all these designers and these people in fashion in their lives that kind of like set the tone of like who they are to who they would be and who they are today. And I think that's super interesting. Black women have like continued to like push fashion forward in so many ways, in ways that they're not necessarily the face of, but they are. Like when I say, like, you think of Jason, remember, he's like a Black designer, he's male, but like everything that he's doing, he wants to pay homage to his grandmother and the women in his life. They're not necessarily like the face of the brand, but they are the whole embodiment of what it is.
Thank you. And there was one more question, also to Antoine, but I think this could be applicable to anyone to answer. How important is family in influencing personal style? What if that family is adopted instead of related by blood?
I also answered this one too. I was just like, like my first introduction to fashion was through my grandmother, but also like it wasn't like my biological grandmother either. So like I don't think it matters more about the presence these people have in your lives versus like how they're related to you, because you don't like I didn't always know that, So it's just like it's more about someone being present in your life and wanting to take you places and wanting you to teach you things, and showing you experiences, because anyone can do that. And I think, like I said, like within the Black family, your mother's best friend's son is your cousin. So it's like we have a very different idea of what family is, and when we do bring people into our lives, into our families, they become family. And I think that's like the beautiful thing about Black fashion and style. Yeah, if someone else can answer too. You have a different opinion on it.
No, I 100% agree. That's why I'm over here quiet. I think I'll just add, I shared with you all my family images and how the women in my life informed my pathway to fashion. But my godmother, who was my mother's best friend, they met in high school, and she was like the embodiment of a godmother. She took care of me. She, when mom couldn't pick me up from school, like she was incredibly present. And so she passed after I graduated with my master's degree from Parsons, and she actually visited New York for the first time for my graduation. And I remember her shopping in stores. Like she would go to vintage stores and I hated it. Like I just hated going because her and my mom would be there all day. And I was just like, can we leave, please? Like there is nothing going on here. But she had this, she had this ability to like find the finest of the luxury goods at these thrift stores in St. Louis. She had big names. And so after she passed, I inherited some of her coats that I continued to wear to feel close to her, and that I noticed had started to play a part in my grieving process after she had passed. And so I think that's also like going back to the Hemp Hill poem, right? And like how clothing also serves as this device for mourning, as this device for feeling close to your loved ones. Again, not just your biological family, but in, so many people in your life. So thank you all. Thank you for that question.
No, I was gonna say that's so interesting because, like I said, my grandmother was a furrier, and then when the garment district started to change, like it closed down, she lost her job, and she got gifted like a bunch of furs. And when she passed, I got all of them. So like I don't wear them because of that cut for me, but I can like get them recut, but I won't. But like it's just something that I have in my closet because they remind me of her. And I think that's why like to like people like it can be just clothes, but also it can have such sentimental value to you that it just becomes, it's more of an artifact than anything.
Yeah.
Same like with these t-shirts, like it just like becomes an artifact that you hold on to forever. It's like I don't know what I'm gonna do with them when I'm old, but it's like I just love that I have them and that it was something that was left for me. But yeah, that's just like really, I like that. That's really cool. But yeah, and same thing, like we would also like go to like thrift shops, but like it's like it influenced like my eye for like everything, because she would find all these great things, and it's just like how are we doing this at like on the budget that we had, and we would like do this maybe like twice a month, and it was just like those are like the things that like you really hold on to, and that's like for me why like fashion has become like such this like super important thing to like who I am.
Yeah, and I also think, Antoine, and sorry we're holding everybody here, but clearly we have a lot to talk about. But I'm also just wondering if you think about, because like there's this merging of like photographs and clothing in the t-shirts that you spoke about. And then us both talking about kind of like these actual garments that we've inherited from family members. And so I guess I'm thinking of that in the context of like how also fashion collections and archives at museums, right, are not representative or reflective of Black people's experiences. Like they have like so much work to do, and how much of that is also happening like within our homes, right? Of like holding on to these fashion objects that have been passed down that inform, like, who knows who has those raccoon coats that those two people wore in Vanderzee's photo, right? Like, I would love to find them because they are worthy of being in fashion collections in the same way that, you know, a socialite, you know, I don't know, Vanderbilt or someone, you know, is adopted, their clothing is adopted into collections. And so I just wonder if you have like a response to that also, and thinking about how these t-shirts might also counter fashion collections, not just collections of, with that don't have images of Black families, but also actual garments.
And I think just like institutions didn't collect images, they didn't collect Black designer clothing, they didn't collect really anything. And a lot of these Black designers don't even have their own archives. So when you want to like research like Patrick Kelly or like a Isaiah Rankin, like it's very, very hard to like find these pieces because like they didn't keep archives. So it's like people who do have pieces, but people who bought them and held on to them, luckily. And even if you look at all the past Met Gala exhibits, the Met exhibits, like you don't really see Black designers. I know the last one, About Time, About Time happened, and then George Floyd happened, and then it opened. And you could see that when you go through the exhibit, there were 3 designers. It was Virgil Abloh, of course, Patrick Kelly, Stephen Burrows, and a Hood by Air piece. Three out of those 4 pieces were collected within months of George Floyd happening. So without that happening, you already know that these pieces were not going to be considered. And I bought the book and I went through the book, and none of the Black designers are in there. So you know that these pieces were only added after the uproar that happened after George Floyd was murdered. And I think even now, so Black like retailers and museums want to like kind of like rush to like collect Black things, but they aren't really doing it with intention. And I think it shows. And I think it sucks to like walk through an exhibit and be like, you see all these Christian Dior from 19 whenever, and then here's this Hood by Air piece that they acquired 2020. You know, just like you didn't consider these things before. And I think that's why we kind of have to consider them ourselves. I mean, even with Black Fashion Fair, we've started to, instead of like pulling pieces from Black designers, we buy them so we can start creating our own archive, because like it doesn't exist. So like that's like what we're trying to do. And like I'm super excited to be doing that because like that's something like I've noticed. Like I've traveled like to a lot of places to see like Mugler exhibits, Hermes, Margiela, like brands that like I love and are cool, but like we don't really get to have that for Black designers or Black people. And I think the ones that I have seen in the past have not been like great. They just haven't. And it's like, it's not really like, the thing, I don't know. Like, I don't know what the reason is, like whether they're not collecting it, whether they're not like caring enough about it, but it's something that needs to change. And hopefully like moving forward and things like Black fashion, like, we can kind of like do those things on our own.
I love that.
Thank you.
You have a question from Amber, Antoine?
So we do, whatever we use in our fashion stories, we buy. So we do have like a collection of like Black designer accessories, but also if you are a Black designer, you can also apply to like be on our fashion, in our fashion directory, so that we can like list your name to your website so people can discover you that way. And also we have a fashion fair every season, every fall season. that you can be a part of. So you can like share your stuff with us through the website if you hit portfolio, blackfashionfair.org. And the next season, we're doing Black Adornment, which is a fashion fair for only jewelry by Black designers. So like, we would love to like talk to you about that, see if we can connect there. So definitely like shoot us, go to the website, hit portfolio and give us your information. And I did see the Willie Smith Street Couture show. I think that was really great. And I spoke to one of the curators for that. And she also spoke about the difficulty of just like getting that done. So there's definitely a lot of work to do.
Great. Well, thank you both. I can listen to y'all chat all day, truly.
This was fun.
Yeah. Thank you all both for your generosity, your scholarship, your advocacy, your institution building, your archive keeping, your stories, and your presence and your time, Antoine and Rikki. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the whole team at Studio. This was such a joy to work with y'all, and this is only the first program. Thank you, Dion, Jennifer, Ilk, Leon, especially for the tunes. And thank you to our access workers, our ASL interpreters, and our captioners. Thank you. Yeah, and yes, share out that Spotify, Ilk. And with that, we'll take it out with one more song. Thank you all so much.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Have a good day.